There we go. Welcome, everybody. Um, Good to see you all. This is session seven of our eight-session LCAN 101 series. If you've been here since the beginning, you've spent over 6 hours building the framework for what I hope will be a high-functioning local college access network. So we've gone through the what, the who, the data, the strategies, the technology. And today we kind of get to the question that's underneath it all. What makes this work permanent? How do I make my LCAN permanent? And I was careful not to say fundable, but permanent because there is a difference and it matters. And we're going to get into all of that today. Quick and dirty, fundable means someone gave you money. Permanent means the community has decided the work is essential infrastructure. The same way they decide the library is essential, the county health department is essential. And that's sort of the standard that we're trying to build toward today. Um, so high ambitions, high raising the bar for today's session. And I know you all can do it. And we're going to look at models that have done it. So it's not impossible. Um, I don't think we have anyone joining for the first time, but if you're also watching this on our LCAN 101 series on the FCAN YouTube channel, you do not need prior sessions to get value from this one. This is really looking with clear eyes at each LCAN's exposure to different resources in their region. And hopefully by the end, we'll have some frameworks to address what some of your resource gaps might be. So everyone, welcome back. Here's what we're going to do today. After our quick poll, we're going to look at a reality check. What does it cost to actually run an LCAN? And what functions are fundable once you know how to sort of name them? The work that you do, how do you name that and get it funded? We're going to look at some parts of our LCAN self-assessment as a roadmap for the work ahead. I'll get more into that shortly. This is a new resource that we just launched a couple weeks ago, and it has a couple pieces that are valuable to our theme today. We're going to look at some lesser known funds that are available in most Florida communities. And I bet you all know what these are. You've had relationships with the folks who run these funds, but maybe haven't gotten funding from them. So we're going to talk about what that looks like, how it came to be, and how you might be able to leverage some existing but underused resources from our network. Then we're going to look at two partner models that I think are really cool that I've been crushing on for 15 years that you might be able to draw some inspiration from as well. One is in South Carolina and one is here in Florida. And then maybe open it up to whatever you're thinking. If there's other models that you've been crushing on and would like to share, we'd love to hear that toward the end of the call. And I did put together a cheat sheet. It's a funding source map that's organized by all the different things an LCAN director does and how you can get funding for that. So it's a really cool tool. Was going to be a one pager and I kept adding to it, but you'll get that in the Dropbox and I'll share a screenshot toward on the last slide. So all that and a bag of chips. Is everyone ready? Okay, here's our checking question. I feel like they get harder and harder. What percentage of your LCAN's funding would disappear if your top funder, your major funder, walked away? And I kind of added this one like an hour ago because I felt like it needed another question. Have you ever talked about that scenario with your leadership council? So you can unmute and chat it out, throw out a number, type it in the chat box. And for those of you with diversified funding, we'd love to hear from that example too. That is always the goal. Anyone want to share? 100. Sorry, thank you, Mark, for being the guinea pig. I know it feels like a dagger in the heart, but that's why you're here, right? So that is your risk exposure.
Yeah,
Same
same
here,
same
Sarah.
here, Mark and
Oh,
Sarah.
geez.
Yeah.
So does that mean it's a single funding source? Is that the situation, or is that just it's over the 50%? If they walked away, there goes the movement.
Well,
I would
since
say first, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
no, you go first. Go ahead.
Sure. I would say, for us, we have diversified funding sources, but I would say the main supporter is, a staff person at our backbone organization, me, the chamber. So if that did not exist, there would not be funding for a person to keep it going. So it would be completely based on volunteers. So, and we know how that
Yep.
goes. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's our situation.
Okay, and some nodding heads. So when we talk about it being risk exposure, that means it's not a reflection of how hard you're working or how valuable this is to your community, but it's more of a structural situation. A lot of it is tied up in origin stories and how it was formed. And so some of us are inheriting other people's origin stories, and this is the reality that we're in. So, no shaming, no blaming, just a reality check. And that's why you're all here. And that's why we're doing this series to figure this out together. Before we go any further, I did want to invite our fundraising expert and also our FCAN executive director, Braulio Colon. He wanted to pop in, and I asked him just to say a few words as someone who really knows how funders think, and what the future of our network is and what we're all aspiring for it to be. So Braulio is letting me put him on the spot. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thanks, Tom. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Sorry, I'm off camera. I'm in like a gardening mode. So yeah, you don't want to see that. But we're gearing up for the summit, and I want to start there because I hope everyone is excited about next week's event. We've got probably our most comprehensive program to date with a really focus on the importance of connecting education to workforce and high value pathways and everything that points towards relevancy for our local college access networks. How do we elevate um, the local college access networks as a required infrastructure that every community should have? Every community should have a table where all of the education leaders and education stakeholders from different sectors come together to collaborate and move the needle on important metrics that are really going to position communities for success from a talent development standpoint. So hopefully the summit agenda reflects that. The keynote speakers speak to that. And during the and networking sections of the agenda, whether that's our networking breakfast or our evening receptions, really encourage you to meet new folks, identify folks you've never seen before, you haven't met before, and engage with them and introduce yourself and get to know what part of the state they're from and what they're doing. Because I tell you, everyone in that space is going to be united on this mission. These are like-minded, committed individuals and organizations that you'll interact with next week. So really excited for that. Um, so when it comes to revenue building and resource development, I want to make some high level points because this won't be the only time we talk about it together. But first and foremost, it starts with one funder, right? I was over here laughing when someone typed, I think it was Mark. He said, 100% would go away, and I will tell you, FCAN started with one funder. Okay, it was the Kellogg Foundation years ago, one funder, and at some point that grant came to a close, and we found ourselves in a position where we had to ask ourselves, are we going to close shop, Or are we going to make the case that everything we've done up until this point should be leveraged and invested in toward the future? So FCAN found itself in a place where we had a lot of research that we completed, and we built a lot of relationships around the state. And if we did not secure additional dollars, all of that would have been lost. All the knowledge building, all of the dialogue that has occurred across various groups just would go away. And we said that can't happen. And so we met with several funders, and they agreed. And here's the thing, I think um, the reason why we were able to convince funders to commit to FCAN had to do with forward-facing vision, not what you're doing right now, but where you could be. Where do you see your LCAN going? And sometimes our fundraising efforts focus on the right now program, the right now need. And some funders want to help build something. Some funders want to invest in programs that are going to deliver at the moment. So it's I think presenting both the long-term vision and the short-term need is really important. It's the 1+1 = 2 that gets funders excited. If I write you this check to help increase FAFSA completion in your community, that's great. Tell me how it's going to impact students this year. That's great. Now tell me how it's going to help move your organization toward the future. What does that mean? What does that mean for your growth and for your future? So right now I'm calling it the 1+1, right? Let's tell the short-term impact plus how it connects to the long-term vision. And then we had to figure out what our role is in the community. And I think LCANs are still trying to, we're all learning together, by the way. We're doing our best to provide the technical assistance and the resources and the connections LCANs need to grow and become stronger. But quite frankly, this is a relatively new movement in the college access space where cross-sector coalitions are coming together to co-design and implement, right? So we're all learning together. But with that, I think what FCAN learned as it was trying to build the plane as it flew was research was going to be a really important part of our work. And that helps establish relevancy for the network. So I would encourage you to think about, what is some early research that your LCAN can do that's county specific or really specific to your community that would help elevate a gap or something that really positions your LCAN as an authority on that particular research project. That's a powerful tool, and it just start with one and think about how that can kick off a narrative or elevate an opportunity for funders. Right? Research can elevate a gap that could attract dollars. The other thing is, this idea of systems versus programs, right? There's a case to be made that LCANs locally are systemic changers. And the folks you have around the table should be a mix of practitioners who are implementing and executing on direct service to students. But there should also be individuals at the table that have influence over policy at the school districts, at the state colleges, and at the universities. Folks who can change the way the institutions are doing business across their system. And I think it's that mix that has the potential to attract a diverse group of funders. I was speaking with Kim earlier, and I said, the LCANs should really see themselves as mini FCANs, in that when you look at the portfolio of services that FCAN provides statewide, why can't our LCANs provide the same type of services specific to their county or specific to their region? And so study the work of FCAN, study the types of resources that we provide and the things that we do from a statewide level, and see if there's a way to pick a few of those that you can apply to your county or to your region, because I think that's, you know, that could introduce some new lanes of resources and support for the work. So those are a few bullets that I wanted to throw out there, but I also want to emphasize that we're learning from you as well. And so I think, we've made some progress, and I think we can continue to grow our network if we just keep sharing what we're learning together. But from what I've observed, those are some notes that I would offer up.
Thank you so much. That was so aligned with what we're talking about, and I didn't even script it. It was brilliant. Thank you. We will have a chance to all interact and see each other in person on Wednesday. We're going to have the whole FCAN team pop into our LCAN pre-summit session, and so many of the folks in our network are new, and so we are all welcome to come and be together in conversation in collaboration with each other. We're going to do some networking and speed dating, so you'll get to see us all in person, including Braulio, on Wednesday. So thank you so much. We're so excited.
ID, followed by pound.
Not sure who that is. If you can mute, that would be great. So thank you so much for that context setting and those highlights. That was great segue to how we usually start our sessions.
ID, followed by pound. Otherwise,
thank you.
You are in the meeting now. There are 7 participants.
Okay, muted that. Sorry about that, everyone. We're going to just start with some context first. We're always looking at the research and the literature and trying to understand where we fit into the universe. And so I wanted to look at what's happening in philanthropy and checking out the latest from the Center for Effective Philanthropy. I dug into their 2025 report. And what I found was a headline that was made in the fall of 2025. Some of you may have caught it. I didn't, and it's not shocking. It's that 70% of nonprofits reported losing funding in 2025. This was a headline moment. This was from at least one source, and 56% of the 70 was from federal sources. So no surprises there. But at the same time, and we all know this so well, just being in this space in our communities, the demand went up. So that's called the scissors effect, when demand goes up and resources go down at the same time. And this exceeded what was documented during the pandemic. And so there's a second finding that's worth sitting with as we get started, that's specific to the education-focused funders who reported to the Center for Effective Philanthropy. And so specifically, they said, and they were below average on every flexibility measure in 2025. So they were less likely than funders in other sectors to increase their giving. They were less likely to reduce restrictions, and generally making funding easier, making it easier for organizations to receive funding. So that's not saying anything against any funder. It's just a data point about the philanthropic environment that LCANs are operating in. Most of you are at a nonprofit, incubated or backboned at a nonprofit fiscal sponsor. So this is just a structural situation that we're living in spring 2026 that will probably exist at least for the next few years. So the question is, how do we live and endure and thrive with all of this happening around us? And what does it actually cost to live and exist and thrive? And so we know that most LCANs run on one person. I think you all self-identified as that person a little bit earlier. And so thinking about how you spend your time, what is that orange everything in your life? and kind of breaking that down to make it visible and make it simpler. And as many of you know, this is how funders often think about staff time when they're reviewing a budget narrative. And it's how we should all be thinking about pricing our work. And so I took a stab at breaking this down into very neat 25% increments. I know many of you, if you could unmute or pop in the chat, this is definitely not 25%. Curious where your time is being tilted toward. But if we divide it neatly into quadrants, just for the purpose of this exercise, we could argue that some of the LCAN leaders' time is spent building access infrastructure or access programming. And here's some examples here that many of our LCANs start with: initiate, manage, monitor, lead, implement, kind of sitting in that access infrastructure piece. The next one at the top is convening and relationship management. You're running all of your councils and your working groups. You're making sure that all the sectors are represented and speaking to each other, kind of monitoring the calendar and all those different agendas and definitions of success. This is backbone work. It's also the hardest work to fund because no funder wants to fund a meeting and it looks like meetings. And we're going to kind of dismantle that a little bit later. 25% is some of the work that Braulio just talked about: publishing data, releasing your local data, holding convenings and doing public engagement about the state of college access in your county, in your region. Just like we do, we call it SOCA, the SOCA report for Florida, which by the way is coming out at the summit next week. You could also be doing state of college access reports for your community, publishing those annually. It takes a lot of time. It's got to be up there on the map. It's about 25%. It takes a lot to manage all of this, especially if you've got a data team and multiple voices at the table. And then this is where I think you'll laugh. If 25% is then fund development, how do you keep the relationships going and turn those into dollars that will resource your LCAN? Also cultivating new relationships, reporting, finding the next dollar before the current one ends. Always sounds like a dream. So each one of these functions is fundable, obviously, but the hardest problem is that LCANs are usually funded through a single source. A lot of philanthropic funders struggle to write a check for backbone work because it doesn't sound like outcomes to them. And what is actually the most time consuming for you, which is building your tables, coordinating partners, running the councils, is the same thing that gets cut. Or, when a funder recalibrates toward direct service, that's like the first thing to go. So the way out of that is kind of what we're going to be focusing on for the remainder of this session and our time together, looking at those different functions, looking at different funders, and maybe speaking a little bit of a different language. So if we're looking at matching functions to funders, here are some examples of how we can begin to get into that work locally. And I was pretty selective here in what I wanted to talk to you all about in terms of funding that exists in most of your counties. And maybe you know about it, but maybe you haven't had access to that funding. So how do we not convince someone that we're valuable, but really have a seat at that table and have some reciprocity going between our LCAN and these access infrastructures that already exist? Same thing with anchor partners. As you're convening and building a sustainable infrastructure for college access, who are the anchor partners and can they invest in your work in perpetuity? Looking at data and public engagement, there's so many needs assessments flying around our counties, and there is funding with needs assessments that we'll talk about in a little bit. And then, of course, the traditional fund development that we're all more familiar with. So we're going to walk through these streams and start with some of the public streams first because they're the most concrete and probably underused. And feel free to interrupt, unmute, ask a question at any time. I think some of this will be familiar to most of you, but maybe there will be some nuggets here that you hadn't thought of. That's at least the goal. We're going to just quickly pivot to the LCAN self-assessment just as a framework. This is going to be in your Dropbox. We just released this a couple weeks ago. We've never done this before. It is the result of a year-long project from an evaluation firm based out of Philadelphia. They're called Research for Action. And they took a look at our LCANs and came up with a self-assessment that you all can use to get stronger. And there are three elements in particular that map to funding and building resources for your LCAN. So a lot of what we talk about here is linked back to the self-assessment and these three elements in particular. The backbone organization that you are part of is also seeking funding opportunities for you and for the College Access Network, that you're not some sort of stepchild over there in your own barren land, but you're an integrated part of what your backbone is and how it identifies. The strategy piece, and again, your score when you look at the self-assessment is your evidence of where you're at and what you can work on. And then sustainability. We talked a lot about that last session. Will you exist in 3 to 5 years? And who are the partners that are going to still be at that table? So the self-assessment is a funding roadmap also, as much as it is a reality check and an aspirational document for the LCANs that are currently filling it out. So we will share this with you all if you haven't seen it already. I know some of you might have gotten it during our affinity call not too long ago. But there are some direct parallels here in this session to the self-assessment that we're really excited about. Because this is teaching us, FCAN, what we need to be doing better as well. What cases do we need to be making, and how can we bring more resources to the LCANs that maybe you can't get on your own? So let's dive into some of these lesser known funds. Money already in your community is being spent on goals that overlap with those of your LCAN. And how can we tap into that? So we're going to start with WIOA and Career Source. All of you know about the Federal Workforce Development System, and it was born through multiple iterations in the 1960s, and each state treats it a little bit differently. And the Job Training Partnership Act is implemented differently across states, but through the years, WIOA is trying to solve a basic problem that sounds familiar to us. How do you connect the people who are most disconnected from the labor market to education, to employment opportunities? WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, was reauthorized in 2014, and that is the law that we are currently sitting with. And so WIOA was never designed to be the one-stop, be-all, end-all. It is designed to be in partnership with local initiatives, and local organizations have a critical role in shaping what WIOA is in those workforce regions. And so that's sort of the LCAN invitation into the room. Has anybody done anything with their workforce board, the WIOA coordinator at Career Source? Does anyone want to pipe in and share what they might have already done in this space?
Hi, Kim. This is Melissa from EarnUp. How are
Yes.
you?
Hello.
I'm showing up probably as my cell phone again. I apologize because I'm driving. So I'm on my phone. We partner with Career Source of Northeast Florida. We actually have a contract with them. They're one of our funders. So we do a lot with them in collaboration with school districts. We hold events with them. They sit at our table in all of our committees. So it's a very important relationship to our LCAN.
Thank you so much. I was hoping you would pipe in and offer that. We actually have two, well, depending on the year, but between 2 and 4 LCANs that do get funding from their WIOA. And the way that they do it is not by saying, will you fund us? It's basically, what performance measures are you required to hit? And how does our LCAN, how might it contribute to your numbers? Because WIOA, here's where I was going to walk through all the lesser known funds. So I'm going to skip through that and go to the WIOA slide. Sorry about that. It's distributed through 21. We used to have 24 career source boards, so I have to get used to saying 21 because some of them consolidated. So 21 workforce boards, and these are the types of things that they tend to fund, exactly what Melissa talked about. So the relationship doesn't necessarily start with like a grant application. It's kind of starts with showing up and forming the relationship, having them at your table, you're at their table, knowing enough about how Career Source is funded to make the case that the LCAN's work serves their mandate. And so these are other examples. Who does it fund and what does it fund? And so the entry point here is your career sources. They do annual priority setting, and then they have contract cycles. And I don't know if you did this at EarnUp, Melissa, but with their self-attestation, I always have to practice that word. um, it now allows for nearly all eligibility requirements. So it kind of reduces documentation burdens for partners. And there's a lot of streamlining that has been done to release WIO dollars to programs that matter and that can show outcomes and align with their plans. So that is the first one I wanted to highlight. Did you want to add something?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to say that absolutely it's a give and take. So they're not just providing for us and we're not just providing for them. For example, I write their quarterly report. So our talent advancement network group, which is all the talent executives and human resource executives from the region, convening them together every quarter also meets a requirement of theirs. And so I document it. I provide the summary and the attendance, which helps them meet a requirement of theirs. But them being at the meeting also helps me with my responsibilities and what I'm trying to accomplish. So it goes both ways. It's a very mutually beneficial relationship.
Awesome. Thank you. Just for the sake of time, we're going to skip to the next one, which is the Carl D. Perkins CTE Fund. Perkins has been the federal investment in career technical education since 1984. We're currently sitting in the 2018 reauthorization, and this was an important one because it made a structural change that you all might be familiar with, but it's more recent. I remember I was leading an LCAN when this happened, and it was very exciting. But basically requires every school district and state college conducting Perkins funded programs to complete a comprehensive local needs assessment every 2 years. So it's required by law to include coordination, consultation with agencies serving out of school and at-risk youth, and the LCANs qualify. So it's not an informal ask here. It's pretty much a statutory requirement of those institutions. So Florida receives about 82 million annually. I had to double check that because it went up a little bit recently. And your school district's allocation is public. It's listed publicly also in the county plans that are on the state website that I can share out. If you're interested, just ping me. Larger districts will receive 2 to 4 million annually is about the range. Smaller districts, half. And so whether your LCAN's work shows up and how that money gets spent is something for you to maybe add to your action plan following session 7. The needs assessment also requires districts to document collaboration with community partners. So it kind of behooves them to be part of the community in doing this work of career guidance and career exploration. So if your LCAN is already doing that, like more boots on the grounds connection work, connecting students to all their post-secondary options, and building career pathways even, then that kind of belongs in the district's application. And if your work is documented in this needs assessment, the district then has a mechanism to subcontract your LCAN for specific activities. And so we're not talking about like life-changing amounts of money here, but we're talking about ways to like bake some continuous funding into your work that maybe you hadn't considered before. So the current needs assessment cycle is running now. If you don't know your Perkins coordinator, that is a great action item. So some details here on what the needs assessment has to address, drawn from the 2018 reauthorization. Anyone want to add anything quickly on Perkins? We do have at least one LCAN that does Perkins, and they actually get funding to do the needs assessment. So they're subcontracted to kind of do that whole shebang, which fits nicely into LCAN world as conveners. Along with lesser known funds, we've got 13 counties here on the left that have a Children's Services Council or equivalent, and each invests some dedicated local revenue into children's programs and services. I've got two maps here. On the left are the voter approved funds, and on the right are the ones who are the members of the state association. So on this call, we have Sarah and Katie and Megan. No, Melissa Duval, the Kids Hope Alliance, which is a dependent because it's a line item in the city budget. But sorry for those of you who don't have one. However, Collier has possibly an even better one because it doesn't have all the government bureaucracy attached to it. So there are lots of ways to get involved in your Children's Services Council, but what I wanted to bring up with you here is that the mandates vary by county in terms of what is the authorization say about how this CSC spends its dollars, but almost all of them have to keep young people in school and out of the justice system. So some extend their range past age 18. There are a couple that go up to age 21. But for those that are stuck on the 18 age, there's still a lot you can do with older youth, with summer youth employment, with ways to engage older youth in college access activities. And in FCAN world, we are actively making the case that these public funds should go toward college access programming in middle school and high school and doing all the evidence-based work that the school districts cannot do, that counselors cannot do. And so this is a huge lever to pull, especially for voters who might be questioning property taxes, and they might want a closer, nearer term outcome. Older youth is a nearer term outcome than investing in early childhood. It might be 10 years before that outcome shows up in your census. So what we can do is really advocate for investing in middle school and high school age programming and bringing those resources into the college access space to education beyond high school, higher education, higher rewards. So we are preaching that from our pulpit. And if you've got an equivalent of these funds locally, we encourage you to do the same. I think this really is a moment for college access to leverage some of these lesser known funds. Also getting involved in their needs assessment cycles and strategic planning, making sure older youth are represented in their funding formulas. We love the little kids. We know it's the 7-to-1, 8-to-1 return on investment, but we can't leave the older youth behind at the same time. So CSBG, anyone that want to pipe in and say, me, I know this one. Again, not a ton of money, but it's something. So the Community Service Block Grant funding has its roots in all the LBJ anti-poverty programs. This was the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, the same act that gave us Head Start and AmeriCorps. So they were created by legislation as a direct service delivery arm of that effort. So all the money passed through traditionally community action agencies around the country. There's over 1,000 of them that still exist, including many in Florida. We actually have 26. I had to go onto their association. It's called FACA, Florida Association of Community Action Agencies, and you can find your community action if you have one in your county, which 26 counties do. And so what we're doing here is basically reaching our same populations that LCANs want to reach. CSBG, as its current iteration, hasn't been reauthorized in many years, but its job readiness job counseling. Community actions are required to have contracts with their career source. So they have overlapping populations that also in our Venn diagram, LCANs overlap with. We are all in one big family. It's at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. It changed a little bit during the pandemic, but it's back to what it was. It's the same student population that we serve. The statute covers education, employment. Community actions can pay for early learning, childcare. They can pay for after school programming. They can pay for tuition. They can pay for testing fees, books, transportation. They are a gap filler between LCANs and state colleges and technical colleges. If they've got funding needs for their students that their foundations can't cover, community actions can cover that. They just need to know about it. And a lot of us aren't talking to our community action agency. It, for some reason, is like one of the best kept secrets in our communities. Why aren't we leveraging these dollars? They have funding. When there is federal funding available and it passes through Florida Commerce, community actions get it. And so often there's a lot more funding than you would think. And I used to do a lot of work with community actions and can't say enough about how awesome these agencies are. We often think of them as the lie heap people, the real crisis people that people go to when every other path has led to a dead end. But they also do a lot of prevention work and education and access and lifting people out of poverty work. So I mentioned the MOU that's required with CareerSource. They also must submit an annual community action plan that's tied to a, guess what? Community needs assessment. This one they have to do every 2 years. And if your LCAN's work is documented in that plan, the community action agency then has a mechanism to include you in how they deploy their funds. So being a subcontractor of community action to deliver a service, or even just being at their table as they're making these decisions and being that alignment of them. So you can find them at Florida Jobs or faca.org. And then your entry point is I would say I would just go to the CEO because they tend to be smaller organizations. No, it's not CDBG. This is Community Services Block Grant, and it's not competitive. They get the allocation based on the poverty level in their county. So CSBG is not CDBG. I know it's been around longer than CDBG. So look into this. Some counties get a lot of money. And if they're not at your LCAN table, they can be fantastic contributors to your mission. They are boots on the ground. It's like the public Catholic charities. All right, that is my community action stump. We also have municipal appropriations. So public pass-through dollars have several access points, and some of our LCANs have been successful in getting written into city and county budget line items. There could be more than two. There's just two that I know of that get recurring budget lines for their backbone operations. This tends to come further in the maturity cycle once you can sort of show what your worth is, show what your outcomes are, that you're needle moving, and that if you were to go away, things would not be good for students, tend to attract these line items. Community Development Block Grant, here we go. You could also, I don't know if you've got a story about CDBG funds, Melissa, but we want to stick to our lane, but CDBG does fit in to those 5 domains that we covered, I think, in session 5. And if your county gets CDBG funding, you want your LCAN to engage in that process and make sure college access is in that plan. It all comes down to making sure that you're being written into the public record. People know what your strategic plan is, what your contribution is, and once it's recognized, it's fundable. So don't be a stranger. You have to be visible and show up in the room where these decisions are made. Library and parks programming partnerships, other hidden sources of funding that LCANs can contract with library systems. We're used to showing up and doing FAFSA, but public libraries can also invest in that work and fund that work and be anchor partners that you kind of share resources with. So not just using their facilities that are often free or low cost, but baking your work into their work, right? Um, I think we have one LCAN that's doing this really well right now, but we've had LCANs in the past do this, especially Summer FAFSA a few years ago had some MOUs with their libraries where they wrote that into their mission and libraries matched the funding LCANs got to do Summer FAFSA. Anyone have a library parks partnership to share for CDBG? All right, the fourth is kind of gets trickier as you go down this list, I'm realizing. Um, Education foundations, regional planning councils, all those sort of fiscal intermediaries for state dollars and sometimes federal dollars. Um, these organizations have and can fund college access work directly. Regional planning councils, in particular, are a resource that a couple of our LCANs have been tapping lately. They administer workforce and education alignment programs. Their dollars often carry flexibility for coordinating and convening, especially if you're targeting zip code work, if you're really working on like a place-based strategy within your county. These are some intermediaries that might have access to funding that you couldn't get directly, but you can get it as a pass through from your regional planning coordinating entity. So the principle across all these examples is, as you can see, not just chasing grants, which I know is still the reality, but how do you get on budgets when budgets are due? Make yourself known to these entities so that when dollars do come to your community, they're like, oh, I know the College Access Group and what they're doing could be a fit here. Make sure that the grant writers in these agencies know about you. The grant writers are the powerhouses. They often are the rainmakers. And all of this starts with you publishing and getting your information out there. So to Braulio's point earlier, making yourself known and then getting outcomes and then kind of pushing yourself into these spaces that might not be as intuitive as others. So looking at those windows and those moments, in I guess the short term and the long term, and some of this longer game stuff and going through some of these resources of everything that we just covered is kind of to this point from, I think I cited this study in the first session one. And obviously it's like kind of a no-brainer here on the screen, but public dollars alone will not make your LCAN permanent. And so the research is consistent. It's not just multiple grants and multiple types of funding, but the ones that survive disruption are those that don't let any single source become irreplaceable. So the more you can diversify and have those buns in the oven and yourself baked into and aligned with what your different agencies are doing who are at the table, the stronger you will be. The more recognizable you will be, and over time, you become this more permanent infrastructure. So I know we've talked about the collective impact graveyard on this series, and it is full of initiatives born out of a 3 to 5 year grant or someone's great idea, and it went away and took the initiative with it. And we now mourn it. There's hundreds of them across the country. As Braulio said, FCAN could have been on the collective impact graveyard. How do you diversify your revenue base? And sort of what comes next is this partner infrastructure model that can hold your network together when a source shifts, when a funding source shifts. So what does infrastructure permanency look like in practice? I'm looking at my time and thinking, hurry it up, girl. Luckily for you, I only have 2 models, not 100. So the first one is backbone cost sharing. So I wrote this little sentence. Your partners show up, they go to your meetings, maybe they're even contributing staff time. Everyone's saying the right things. How many of them are actually making a tangible contribution, a physical check? So the backbone cost sharing is a way to close that gap between your biggest cheerleader and your biggest check writer, right? Or your most engaged partner. And so I wanted to show you a model that's outside Florida. And it's a group I've been crushing on forever. They're called SAM, the Spartanburg Academic Movement. They started small. They started with kindergarten readiness. That's not small. But they also started with FAFSA on the other side. They do the bookends. And over time, through disasters and floods and drama, they have written themselves into what it means to be a resident of Spartanburg. And so they are, if you mention Spartanburg, chances are someone's going to mention Sam, especially in education circles. So their new thing that I want to share with you, and you'll get this link, is Movement 2030. So they've managed to exist, grow, become so permanent that they are now the holder of Movement 2030. They call themselves a capital aggregator, meaning they attract all the investments to achieve the goals for the 2030 Spartanburg strategic plan. And then they allocate through this partnership circle of 30 people all of the funding that they attract. They then distribute it and reimburse as long as it's aligned with Movement 2030. It's like this genius way to create a convening ownership over a community strategic plan. So if you go to Movement 2030, you can check out what they're about. They just published their most recent report card. It's gorgeous, it's impressive. They are changing outcomes. And it started by being a neutral convener. That was the very first role that they played. They were just simply organizing, getting the community together, making sure strategic plans and needs assessments aligned, and just being there as that neutral facilitator, right, with their data, putting students first. Then looking at where can we make a difference? What's the current state? They start publishing. Some of their first reports came out about 10 years ago, tracking things that no one was really able to track, that no one owned, kind of creating that special space that we all hold dear. And then building the infrastructure to start coordinating people, getting some early wins, some results. You know, success breeds success, doing some demonstrations. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. They kept going to the point where now they are the holder of the strategic plan and how it's being implemented and funded in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Like, it's the coolest thing ever to watch them come up from doing a FAFSA challenge to being the container of the county strategic plan. So I don't have time to go into the whole thing and what all their goals are, but they want to do 70% attainment by 2030 for Spartanburg County. You can read all about it and crush on them like I have for many years. Their CEO and founder has won all the awards and is a real trailblazer in college access and collective impact. So go check out Spartanburg, look at their origin story, and sort of get inspired by what you can do. Where you make your value so precise and compelling that you end up being the owner of the whole thing. And really admiring how they did that over many years. This was not yesterday. So the second one is partner contribution model. I think I've referenced Roundtable of St. Lucie. Love them. So what if membership had a price tag? So your anchor partners contribute financially to sustain you, the LCAN backbone, depending on what their budget size is what their contribution is. And that is part of being at the round table, is that these agencies also contribute dollars. And it's about $5,000. We're not talking about earth-shattering amounts of money, but each agency, there are 29 of them, contribute about $5,000 annually to be part of the roundtable of St. Lucie County. We don't have an LCAN in St. Lucie County. That's okay. Their roundtable is doing LCAN work. And they have been since 1995. So just a quick snapshot here of the stats from the roundtable. I just looked up their 990 today, and it's about $1 million. And most of that is to do the work. It's not salaries. They only have 2 or 3 people on staff. It's to do like the work. And so they do all of the alignment and convening and the organizing around these outcomes. And this is what they've been able to achieve according to their focus areas. So they are focused on juvenile issues. They're focused on some of the arrows that you see. The green means good. So lower teen pregnancies, like many of us have seen, but also dependency and substance abuse, and targeting specific subgroup outcomes. There's a lot more in their reporting about getting youth off the streets and engaged and bringing in resources and programming for youth in St. Lucie County, organized around convening and conversations. This was actually set up by their Children's Services Council. Back in 1995, the Children's Services Council of St. Lucie said, we need a convener. We can't convene. We're a funder. It's weird if we convene because they're just going to come because they need money. So we need a roundtable of agency leaders who will tell us what's happening so that we can all solve problems that money can't solve. And so getting the roundtable together and then cultivated over 30 years has been able to move the needle on so many youth outcomes. And it started with the North Star. It's the same North Star that it was in the beginning. The governance structure where the members are accountable for the roundtable's survival. The contribution schedule is fair. It's not crazy. And then it produces results. And the agency leaders have a say in what those results are. So Teresa runs the roundtable. She's been there forever. She would love to jump on a call with anybody in our network and tell them how this works. When you get the judge and the sheriff and the superintendent and the chamber and all the groups together, your child welfare agencies, your hospital CEOs, and then really clear goals. She is not in outer space about what she wants to achieve. It is really specific. And so over time, they've been able to do the DJJ plan for their county. They've been able to take on contract work, which is the majority of their budget, to produce strategic plans for youth in St. Lucie County. So, but it started with leaders coming together and saying, we need to do something. LCANs are a little bit different in that maybe you're forming and then bringing people to the table. That's okay. We all start from different places. Some of us were founded by businesses, and then you bring the agencies in. Some of it's flipped. These are all just examples of how collectives and intermediaries have been able to get funded and sustain themselves through the years. So lots of great resources on the Roundtable's website. It's a wonderful website because they don't ever archive anything. So you can just go back in and look at the whole history. There's also some YouTube videos and a very, very accessible team over there who would be happy to share with you what they're up to and how they got there. A lot of the original founders are still agency leaders and still at the table. So your toolkit, I am 1 minute over, but this is the last slide. So I mapped out your LCAN functional area, which was those 25%, explain the funding stream, give you some language to talk to funders about / partners. How do you get there if it's brand new to you? And then how does it tie back to the LCAN self-assessment? So you'll see this in the Dropbox. It's a 3-pager. Hopefully it's helpful. There's also some links in this slideshow that you'll get. And I can't believe how fast that went. I appreciate your time so much. We only have one session left. And this is the one that is going to give you what we used to call a logic model and is more of a theory of action, a theory of change. How do you become that glue in your community? How do you build that plan to get there? That's what we're going to go through. Planning for population level impact. We have some really cool tools, of course, and exercises to guide you through that are tried and true in our world that you can take back to your teams and start doing immediately. So I'm really looking forward to that session. We've been doing the Theory of Change for a few years now. So you'll get the latest and greatest version of it on session 8. And that was all for me today. I'm going to stop the recording and hang on if anyone wants to stay on and chat. So thank you all so much. I can't wait to see you next week, those of you who are coming.
Thank you. That was good.